Greetings from down under, everyone. My name is Bernadette Luciano, and I work at the University of Auckland. Together with Susanna Scarparo, my colleague at the University of Sydney, we contributed the Italian chapter of the book, which engages with some of the same issues that we had broached in our 2013 book, Reframing Italy, on Italian women and film. So what I'm going to do is highlight some aspects of our chapter, and Susanna will follow on with the takeaways for today. Our chapter is entitled Women in the Italian Film Industry Against All Odds, and in it we consider the marginalization and stereotyping of women in a highly patriarchal film industry and the problems involved in accessing the industry and in articulating an aesthetics that speaks directly to female audiences. While certainly the situation for women is in many ways not dissimilar to that in other countries, we also argue that the situation in Italy is more extreme due to the attitudes and practices that are deeply embedded in Italian society and politics. If we take, for example, just considering our recent history, the 20-year reign of Silvio Berlusconi as both politician and media mogul, and how that accounted for a duopoly in Italian cinema that basically validated the systematic sexual objectification of women in Italian society and in its cinema. Despite organized reactions to the state of affairs and the emergence of a number of initiatives that took up the challenge of keeping women's issues at the forefront of public debate, troubling attitudes and practices continue to prevail. We might take, as another example, the limited and guarded response to the Italian equivalent of the Me Too movement. With very few Italian women coming forward with their own stories, the men who were named in sexual harassment cases and the allegations of misconduct actually triggered a backlash against the accusers, turning the alleged molesters into victims. Now, the media, for the most part, did not stand behind the women, and in fact, as one of the journalists who wrote the story against one of the directors suggested, such silence and non-name recall the mafia code of silence and omertà, or protecting one's own. Now, this notwithstanding, a number of industry-related events in 2018 demonstrated the tendency among Italian women involved in the film industry to favor forms of collective solidarity that call for cultural change. An open letter was signed by 124 women who work in the film industry, and it was published in the daily newspaper La Repubblica in February 2018. The letter vigorously denounced sexual misconduct, which the signatories define as a condition that prevails across all sectors of society. Claiming it is a systemic problem extending beyond the film industry, they called for the system as a whole to be changed rather than individuals blamed. As Italian filmmaker Elena Marazzi notes, this kind of work would take much longer to accomplish, and she expresses hope that the work of filmmakers can help in sharing and creating awareness among the younger generation. But change will indeed take a long time. According to the 2018 World Economic Forum, at the current rate, it would take 202 years to close the economic gender gap. So this brings me to a final focus of our chapter, which turns to an important report on women in the Italian film industry, commissioned in 2016 by the Italian Society of Authors and Publishers, and influenced by broader discussions that were going on concerning gender inequality in the workplace. The report was prepared by DEA, Donne in Audiovisivo, Women in the Audiovisual Industry, and it identifies a number of factors that impact on women in the industry, such as hiring discrimination, lower pay, precarious work conditions, difficulty in accessing decision-making positions, major funding access problems. So the report is supplemented by interviews with women from across the film industry, which relay their gendered experiences, discrimination encountered in their career progressions, and the impact of prevailing practices on their ability to foreground a more nuanced female-centered aesthetics or content in their work. The interviews do lead to some interesting considerations for the future. And these are the takeaways that Susanna will now speak to. Over to you, Susanna.
There are concrete policy recommendations and strategies that can be enacted by political institutions, lawmakers, and employers, and this can make a difference. Gender parity in the hiring of teaching staff and in the admission of students to Italy's film schools, particularly in areas in which women have been traditionally underrepresented and disadvantaged, that's one. A more equal distribution of public funding and increased presence of women on all commissions that evaluate and grant public funds could really help the Italian industry. Publicly funded projects should offer flexible working conditions to account for caregiving obligations, which women often have. We should continue to work on increasing efforts to attribute greater visibility to the contribution of women to the audiovisual industry through resourcing archives that highlight the role of women in the past, but also databases that account for the contribution and the roles that women are playing in the present. The archives would ensure that contributions women have made to the film industry in the past are not forgotten, and will also provide examples of positive role models. And the database of all women currently working in the industry would ensure that there is an up-to-date list of active female professionals the production companies could access. Mentoring programs would also play a crucial role in Italy, where historically the film industry has relied heavily on nepotism. The mentoring process should begin in film school, where a seasoned professional could be assigned to guide students in their projects and assist them in establishing networks that will prove valuable in the development of future projects. The mentoring should continue post-study, following the various phases of women's careers. These investments in resources and concerted efforts to enact new practices to support women will not go to waste, as Italian women filmmakers, like women filmmakers all over the world, have had to innovate by necessity. And in our work, we've written extensively on what that has meant and what that involved. So the opportunities afforded by the growth of streaming platforms would provide an ideal setting for Italian women to turn the effects of what we know that the COVID-19 pandemic will have on funding for cinema and distributions and production of films into a positive, into something that can actually work in their favor. It will give women the opportunity to tell the stories in which they have important roles, both in front, but also behind the camera. Thank you.